So we are now only a few weeks away from the NFL draft. It's getting closer and closer. And earlier today, some interesting information came out from Bill Huber of Sports Illustrated about a wide receiver prospect who's likely to go in round one, Matthew Golden. He met with the Packers in the past day or so. So here it is from Bill Huber in his article at Sports Illustrated. He says, Texas's Matthew Golden, the fastest receiver at this year's scouting combine, flew into Green Bay on Thursday for a pre-draft visit with the Packers, according to his Instagram. The Packers have shown considerable interest in Golden throughout the draft process. They met with him formally at the combine, and general manager Brian Gutekunst attended Texas's Pro Day. Now Golden is coming to Green Bay for the coaches to get a more in-depth look at the player who could become the team's first-round receiver since Javon Walker in 2002. And so it feels like for years and years, we always, as Packers fans, wonder if this streak of not drafting a first-round receiver will finally break. And I feel like in my mind, when you think about it, sure, I feel like eventually it's going to happen. I doubt that in 50 years we're sitting here and they still haven't drafted a receiver since in the first round since 2002. I feel like eventually it's going to happen. But when you do look at the history, you look at the Packers' success finding receivers outside of round one, I still wonder why, this year would really change anything for the Packers. If you've, found a strategy that's pretty successful and you're able to consistently find pretty solid receivers outside of round one, I don't see why you have to jump up and take one in round one. That could change, however, if Gutekunst and the Packers scouts find a guy that they think could really change things for Green Bay, and let's say they're sitting at pick number 23, and a receiver, maybe it's Matthew Golden, is the number one guy on their board. I don't think they'd say, you know what, we're just not going to do it because this isn't what we do. I think they could be interested in someone, if there's no other guys around there that they think would fill a bigger need. But at the same time, when they've shown you time and time again what they do, I'm just not going to buy into the fact that they will do this, even though, technically anything is always possible. And when we look at Matthew Golden, he was a really solid receiver at Texas. Here's a breakdown from Daniel Jeremiah, who used to be an NFL scout. Here's from an article on NFL.com. He has Matthew Golden as a 16th best player in the draft. He says Golden has average size. He's about 5'11", 191. But he plays with tremendous polish, instincts, and toughness. He spends a lot of time operating out of the slot. I believe it's about a fourth of the time. Pretty sure just last year. So mainly outside, but he can defeat press coverage with quickness or strength. He understands how to tempo routes and sets up defenders down the field. He can change gears when the ball goes up, and he tracks it naturally. He does a nice job of staying grounded through the catch when working on crossers. He has the utmost confidence in his ball skills. After the catch, he is very strong/sturdy to pull through tackles, and he can make defenders miss in space. I love his temperament on the field. He plays with an edge. Overall, Golden doesn't have dynamic traits, but he's a natural football player and a quarterback's best friend. He's dependable. And I think the big thing for him is he did run a 4.2940, which was the fastest at the combine. So he has some insane speed. And I think now for the Packers, when you just sort of look at the makeup of this whole team and you look specifically at the wide receiver room, there are a few things to keep in mind, not just for the 2025 season, but looking to next offseason. Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs are going to be free agents next season if they don't receive a new contract before next offseason. With Christian Watson, you have the unfortunate reality of him having to come back from an ACL injury. That definitely complicates things and will make it, more difficult, I think, for Watson to really get a massive contract, just because even if he does come back midway through the season, maybe November, we don't exactly know when that's going to be. If you're the Packers, do you really feel comfortable giving him a long-term deal when he has dealt with a lot of injuries in his early years in Green Bay and coming off an ACL tear? Even if he shows that he looks pretty good, do you feel comfortable giving him a lot of guaranteed money? I'm not sure about that. I think they'll have to sort of wait and see how he progresses and how he looks. And then with Romeo Doubs, I really loved Romeo Doubs. I really do think, as I've said on this channel a lot, if you've watched in the past, that if he got a lot more looks like some of these top targets in the league, that he would produce at a much higher level because he is a very consistent route runner. He gets open all the time. I think he has some pretty solid hands. And so if I had to pick out of those two guys, at least just right now, if the Packers had to pick one to bring back and keep around for the long haul, I would guess that it's Romeo Doubs, just because he has been a little bit more consistent. He dealt with some injuries, some concussions, which I guess if he got more, that's something that could be a concern in the future. But I just think with Christian Watson, he just dealt with some different injuries. He's been somewhat productive. I feel like he's sort of hot and cold at times, but he was playing pretty solid until he went down last year. But in my mind, if I had to guess, I would say they keep Doubs. I just think that he's, right now, probably the most trusted receiver from Jordan Love when it comes to, like third down. If Jordan Love has to find a guy, I think that Doubs is the guy, at least for now. So a lot of things can change as we head into the season, but that's sort of my thoughts there. But you always have the chance that the Packers decide to bring back neither of them. I don't know if that would happen, just because I think that with a guy like Jordan Love, Watson and Doubs are those guys that he's built that chemistry with over the years. And so do you really want to take away a guy like Doubs who just has built up that chemistry with Love? That's a question the Packers have to ask themselves. And I think that one big aspect of this whole wide receiver discussion, and if the Packers will take a wide receiver in round 1 or round 2, is when you look at the wide receiver market, it's gotten crazy expensive, just as, a lot of different positions have in the NFL. And with the salary cap always increasing, every position, the numbers are going to keep going up and up. And I guess when you compare it to percentage of the cap, maybe it's not that much more than typical, but the numbers are just massive. With Ja'Marr Chase getting $40 million per year, that's crazy for a receiver. And if we look at the 20th highest paid receiver, it's Chris Godwin at $22 million per year. And so if you're Brian Gutekunst and you're looking at the future, he has to recognize that if he brings back Romeo Doubs, from what we've seen so far from Doubs, based on his production, I don't think, Doubs is going to become a top 10 highest paid receiver, even if I think he has that ability, just because he hasn't produced at that level. And let's say he even got paid as the 20th best receiver, which could be higher than that potentially, but let's say 20th best, tying with Chris Godwin. That's $22 million per year. And so if you're Gutekunst and you're looking at that, would you say, okay, maybe it's better if we draft a first-round receiver, second-round receiver, and we have them for 4 years on a cheap deal instead of having to pay Doubs something like $22 million a year? That's where I don't see them paying both Watson and Doubs. I feel like they'll just bring one back potentially. And if you do draft a receiver high, you get that cheap contract. And so that's where the Packers will get a lot more flexibility just when it comes to the decisions they have to make heading into next season if they do draft a young receiver, because then they're not put in a spot where they have to pay one of those guys. Not that if they don't draft a receiver, they have to. It just gives them a lot of flexibility. And I think that when it comes to surrounding Jordan Love with a lot of talent, the Packers already have a ton of talented guys in this receiver room. There are some guys who I think need to take some steps forward and become more consistent, like Dontavian Wicks, like Jayden Reed. Both of those guys were pretty bad when it came to drops, some of the worst in the league, and that's something they need to improve on. But there's a ton of talent already in this wide receiver room, and I do think that if you drafted let's say you did draft Matthew Golden round 1, that's a pretty stacked wide receiver room in my mind. And then going forward, you just have a lot more flexibility. You can keep your room pretty cheap if you don't want to bring back Doubs or Watson if you do draft a guy somewhat high. And when we look at the Packers draft history the past few years with receivers, they went super heavy in 2022 and 2023. They drafted 3 receivers in 2022, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Samori Toure, and then 3 in 2023, Jayden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, and Grant Dubose. Then this past year, 2024, they draft 0 receivers, and so I do think they'll probably draft at least one. They need to replenish the room because after this year, as I said, Watson and Doubs free agents. After next year, you have guys like Reed and Wicks as well as free agents, and so I feel like they'll definitely draft at least one receiver this year, and it wouldn't be surprising if it's somewhere in the first 3 rounds. That's something that could make a lot of sense, and that's the thing with the draft. I'm not in this mindset where I think that they have to do one thing, and if they don't draft a certain, need like edge rusher, that all hope is lost, or that if they don't draft an edge rusher, that means that their first round pick is, not great. I do think, like in my mind, I feel like the biggest need is edge rusher. And I have heard lots of people say that they believe it's a very deep defensive line class. And so on the one hand, maybe they go round 1 edge rusher. Maybe if they think there's a lot more depth there, they could wait till round 2, and maybe they could push a receiver up to round 1. I still think defensive line would be better to go for in round 1, just because I think you have a lot of talent at receiver, and I think the Packers have shown they can find guys later in the draft, so why not wait for a receiver round 2, round 3, round 4, where you got Dobbs in round 4. Of course, over the years, Devontae outside of round 1, Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb. So that's where I don't think they need to draft a receiver round 1, but they could decide to break away from what they've typically done. But those are pretty much my thoughts. The Packers have met with a few other guys as well. I think it's like 5 or 6 now. But Matthew Golden was the most recent one. But if you guys want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe down below. Turn on the post notifications so you don't miss any Packers content. And I'll see you guys next time.